The first light of dawn brushed the tall grasses of the savannah with a soft gold. Elijah Moyo, a seasoned ranger, paused atop a small hill, thermos in hand. The world stirred gently, a bird call here, a rustle there. But then came the roar. It rolled across the plains like thunder from a storm long gone. Deep, ragged, and slow. Not the sharp, defiant cry of dominance he knew so well, but something older, worn, a goodbye. Elijah froze. He knew that voice. Sakuru, he whispered, the old lion with the graying mane. King of this territory for nearly a decade. Their paths had crossed often, sometimes with cautious glances, other times in quiet companionship at dusk. The ranger had watched him age, watched challengers come and go. But this roar...
It wasn't a call for rivals. It wasn't for pride or power. It was the sound of a ruler laying down his crown. Elijah set his thermos down gently. Somewhere in the distant ridge, a chapter was ending, and in the quiet that followed, the savannah listened. On with the radiant golden mane, the one who roamed alone yet ruled like a ghost over the savannah, was nowhere to be seen. Whispers spread among villagers, poachers, traps, bones in the dust. Elijah Moyo refused to believe it, not without proof. Then came the sound. A distant, ragged roar carried on the early morning wind, faint but unmistakable. A cry with weight. Behind it, not of defiance but weariness. A voice fading. Elijah didn't wait. He packed light and set off alone, trekking toward the far ridge where the call had come from. Buzzards circled high in the pale sky, and elephant trails cut across the cracked earth beneath his boots. He moved with urgency, heart heavy with dread. By sunset, he found signs, paw prints, scattered fur, a trail leading deeper into the thorn bush. He pressed on. Kumba was more than a lion. He was legend, and legends don't just disappear, not without saying goodbye. Elijah moved swiftly but carefully, his boots crunching over brittle grass and cracked soil. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the parched earth. He followed the faintest signs, a drag in the dust, broken reeds, the unmistakable imprint of a lion's paw. Then came the blood. Dried and dark against the ochre ground, it streaked in uneven trails. Nearby, deep claw marks gouged a tree trunk, signs of a desperate fight. Elijah knelt, running calloused fingers over the marks. Kumba had fought back, hard, but he was hurt, badly. The trail was erratic now, circling through thornbush and dry. Riverbeds. Each step told a story, a stumble, a rest, a will to survive. Elijah pressed on, heart pounding with every new clue. The lion was still moving, still alive. And Elijah wasn't turning back. The canyon was still, eerily so. Only the whisper of wind moved through the brittle leaves of a dying acacia tree. Elijah stepped cautiously, the air heavy with dust and silence. Then he saw him, Kumba. The great lion lay stretched in the shadow of the tree, his golden mane dulled by blood and dust. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Wounds marred his side, deep, ragged, and recent. Elijah's heart clenched at the sight of the once mighty king reduced to this fragile shell. But it wasn't just the lion that stopped him cold. Nestled against Kumba's flank, barely breathing, was a cheetah cub. Small, shaking, its leg twisted. At an unnatural angle, its spotted fur caked with dirt. And yet the lion made no move to push it away. His massive paw was gently curled around the cub, as if guarding it. Predator and prey, wounded and waiting. Elijah dropped to a knee, overwhelmed. This was no ordinary end. It was something far rarer. A final act of quiet defiance against nature's rules. And it changed everything. Elijah crouched in silent disbelief. Lions were apex predators, territorial, solitary, unforgiving. They didn't nurture the young of other species. And yet, here lay Kumba, his massive frame curved protectively around a fragile cheetah cub. The cub blinked weakly, barely able to lift its head, but it leaned into the lion's side with quiet trust. Elijah had seen many things. In his years on the savannah, life, death, brutal survival. But never this. Kumba, battered and breathing in shallow gasps, turned his head slowly toward the cub. With great effort, he gave it one last nudge, his nose brushing the cub's side. Then, as the golden light of evening spilled into the canyon, Kumba raised his head to the sky, a single roar. It was soft, but it echoed through the cliffs like thunder. A farewell, a declaration, a legend's final breath. Then, silence. The lion's body stilled. The cub whimpered softly, curling into the space where Kumba's warmth remained. Elijah stood frozen, tears stinging his eyes. What he had witnessed was beyond instinct, beyond survival. It was something closer to grace. The roar lingered, reverberating, through the canyons and across the vast plains like a solemn hymn. Then, silence. A silence so deep Elijah could hear his own breath shaking. He stood motionless, heart aching, eyes locked on the still form of Kumba. The mighty lion, once the feared, untouchable king of the savannah, hadn't used his final strength to fight for life. He had used it to protect a life more fragile than his own. The cheetah cub whimpered, barely audible, and curled tighter into Kumba's flank. The lion's warmth was fading, but his presence lingered, an invisible shield around the cub. Elijah knelt, unable to look away from the unlikely bond. A predator had become a guardian. A dying king had chosen compassion. In that moment, the harsh laws of nature seemed to bend. Elijah wiped his eyes, drawing a shaky breath. This story, Kumba's final act, deserved to be told, not as a tale of death, but of something far rarer in the wild, mercy. And as the wind picked up again, the roar seemed to echo once more, not in sound, but in spirit. Elijah raised his radio with a trembling hand. "I've found Kumba," he said, voice thick. But he wasn't alone. Static crackled on the other end, but Elijah barely heard it. His eyes remained on the tiny cheetah cub, still pressed against the lion's unmoving body. It was weak, ribs visible beneath its spotted coat, and its breaths came shallow and slow. Yet it refused to leave him. Kumba had protected it to the end. Elijah knelt, removing his jacket. Slowly, gently, he lifted the cub. It whimpered once, protesting, but he held it close to his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered. He glanced at Kumba one last time, lying in the shadow of the tree, proud even in death. Elijah didn't disturb the body. Some kings deserved to rest where they fell. Turning toward the horizon, he began the long walk back. At the reserve, the cub's survival seemed uncertain. Dehydrated, malnourished, and emotionally scarred, he clung to life with a quiet strength. The staff named him Kumba Jr., a tribute to the lion who had sheltered him in his final hours. Weeks passed. Under the care of rangers and veterinarians, the cub began to heal. His limp faded, his eyes brightened, and soon he was sprinting across the grass enclosures with a speed that stunned even seasoned handlers. But it wasn't just speed that set him apart. Kumba Jr. was different. He stood, tall, unafraid of older animals. He guarded younger or weaker ones, often placing himself between them and perceived threats. He'd perch on high rocks, scanning the horizon like a sentinel. Even his stare, steady, unblinking, echoed the calm authority of the lion he was named after. "He's got Kumba's spirit," Elijah often said, watching from the fence line. Time visitors came to see the cheetah cub who'd been raised by a dying lion. But to the rangers, Kumba Jr. wasn't just a curiosity. He was a living legacy, a quiet reminder that even in the wild, courage and compassion can shape a new kind of king. Months passed, but the memory of Kumba's final act never faded. At the canyon where he had taken his last breath, the reserve commissioned a statue, crafted from local stone, weathered and strong. It depicted the lion lying peacefully, his body curled protectively around a small cheetah cub. Every detail was carefully carved. The scars on Kumba's flank, the gentle tilt of his head, the cub nestled close beneath his great paw. When it was unveiled, a quiet hush fell over the gathered crowd. This wasn't just a monument. It was a testament, a symbol of strength beyond dominance, of sacrifice that defied instinct, of an unlikely bond that changed how people saw the wild. Visitors came from across the world to see it. They listened to the ranger's stories, stood in the shadow of the statue, and left with a reverent silence. Some wept. Others simply stared, hearts stirred by the silent stone figures. For Elijah, it was closure. For the world, it was a reminder. Even in the fiercest corners of nature, compassion finds a way. And in that quiet canyon, Kumba's roar still echoed, not in sound but in stone. Even in death, Kumba changed everything. His final act, shielding. A helpless cheetah cub with his own wounded body, defied everything rangers thought they knew about lions. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't pride. It was something deeper. A conscious choice to protect even as life slipped away. The roar he gave that day wasn't of dominance or pain. It was of purpose. A message not shouted in anger, but whispered, compassion, and the land heard it. Now Kumba Jr. runs across those same plains, lean and swift with eyes full of fire. But within him is something more, a fearless heart, a protective spirit that echoes the lion who saved him. He doesn't just survive. He carries on a legacy. Rangers, once hardened by the brutality of nature, now speak of Kumba with reverence. Visitors stand before the stone statue and listen in awe, because sometimes the loudest message comes from a dying roar, and what follows lives forever. We hope this touching story warmed your heart. If it did, please like, share, and subscribe for more real stories of courage, kindness, and the powerful bonds between animals and humans.